Welcome back to my channel Shattered Trust Stories. The sun had barely begun to dip beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the city of Los Angeles. In the heart of the city, the lights of downtown flickered on one by one, signaling the arrival of another night in the fast-paced world of high society. But for some, tonight would be anything but ordinary. The story we're about to uncover is one of deception, high stakes, and an explosive revelation that would rock the foundations of not just a marriage, but an entire criminal empire. This is the story of a cheating wife, a powerful Mexican drug lord, and a covert sting operation that exposed it all. Grab your popcorn, because this tale is full of twists, turns, and enough suspense to keep you on the edge of your seat. It all started on a rainy night in Mexico, deep in the heart of Sinaloa. The streets were slick with rain as an unmarked black SUV pulled up to a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside that warehouse, a meeting was taking place that would change the course of history for not just one family, but an entire network of ruthless criminals. The man at the center of it all was known as El Lobo, a feared Mexican drug lord with ties that stretched across the globe. His reach was vast, his power undeniable. He ruled with an iron fist, leaving a trail of broken bodies and shattered lives in his wake. But for all his power, El Lobo had one weakness: his wife, Maria. Maria was the kind of woman who could charm anyone, anywhere. Her beauty was legendary, but it wasn't just her looks that made her dangerous. Maria was intelligent, manipulative, and she knew how to use her allure to get what she wanted. She had always played the role of the dutiful wife, standing by her husband's side through thick and thin. But beneath the surface, Maria harbored a dark secret, a secret that no one, not even El Lobo, was aware of. For years, Maria had been carrying on an affair with one of her husband's most trusted men, a ruthless enforcer named Javier. Javier was a dangerous man in his own right, but he was also captivated by Maria's charm, and their affair had been going on for months. They would meet in secret, far from the prying eyes of El Lobo's empire, but their love was a ticking time bomb, one that was about to explode in a way they never saw coming. Meanwhile, in the shadows of this criminal empire, a special task force had been watching, waiting, and gathering evidence. They knew that El Lobo's empire was built on bloodshed and corruption, but they didn't have enough to bring him down. However, the discovery of Maria's affair with Javier would be the perfect leverage. The authorities knew that if they could expose Maria's betrayal, they could get to El Lobo. After all, no man, no matter how powerful, would let his wife's infidelity slide, especially when it could be used to destroy everything he had built. It wasn't long before an informant within the cartel came forward with crucial information. This wasn't just any informant, though. This was someone who had worked closely with Maria and knew the ins and outs of her personal life. The informant had witnessed a crucial meeting between Maria and Javier, a meeting that would be the key to everything. The plan was set into motion. For weeks, the task force had been tracking Maria's every move, listening to her phone calls, and monitoring her online activities. They had discovered that she and Javier were planning a secret rendezvous in the United States, right in the heart of Los Angeles. It was the perfect opportunity for the authorities to catch them red-handed, and they weren't going to let it slip through their fingers. As the day of the meeting approached, the task force went into high alert. They had a plan in place, but they needed the right timing. Everything had to fall into place. Maria and Javier would meet at a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills, a place known for its privacy and exclusivity. The authorities had already infiltrated the hotel, positioning undercover agents in every corner, waiting for the couple to arrive. The night of the meeting arrived, and Maria and Javier both made their way to the hotel. The moment they stepped out of their cars, unaware of the eyes that were watching them from all angles, the agents were ready. They moved swiftly, quietly, and methodically. Inside the hotel, the couple checked in under assumed names, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. It wasn't until they reached the penthouse suite that the authorities made their move. The door to the suite was kicked in, and within seconds, agents stormed the room, arresting Maria and Javier. The look of shock on their faces was priceless. But the real shock would come just moments later when they discovered who was behind the operation. While Maria and Javier were being detained, the task force had already alerted the highest levels of law enforcement, and El Lobo himself was the next target. They knew that if they could tie him to his wife's betrayal, it would be the final piece of the puzzle they needed to bring him down for good. But even as they prepared to make their move on El Lobo, they knew that this was only the beginning. The real danger was still lurking in the shadows. Back in Mexico, El Lobo was watching the events unfold on his private security feed. He had no idea that his empire was about to crumble. His rage was like a wildfire, unstoppable and all-consuming. He had always known his wife to be a woman of secrets, but he never imagined that she would betray him in such a way. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else, and he vowed to exact revenge on anyone who was involved. But the authorities were ready. They had anticipated El Lobo's reaction, and they had already set up a trap. They knew that he would come after Maria, that he would do everything in his power to protect his empire. And when he made his move, they would be waiting. The following day, as Maria and Javier were being interrogated, a call came in from an unknown number. It was El Lobo. The task force had been prepared for this moment. They had intercepted the call and traced it back to a location in Mexico, where El Lobo was coordinating a retaliation plan. What they didn't know was that El Lobo had planted a mole within their ranks, someone who had been feeding him information from the inside. As the trap closed in on El Lobo, it became clear that the sting operation had escalated to a level no one had expected. The mole's betrayal would only add fuel to the fire, and soon, both sides were locked in a dangerous game of cat and mouse. With each passing hour, the situation grew more intense. The authorities knew they had one shot at taking down El Lobo once and for all. They had to move fast, before he could escape and disappear into the shadows forever. But El Lobo was no fool. He had already begun to execute his own plans, and he wasn't going down without a fight. The clock was ticking, and the final confrontation was imminent. As night fell again over Los Angeles, a sense of foreboding hung in the air. The authorities had launched a full-scale assault on El Lobo's compound in Mexico, but El Lobo's forces were well armed and prepared for battle. The two sides were about to clash in a violent showdown that would determine the fate of not just a criminal empire, but an entire family. The explosive conclusion to this story would soon unfold, but one thing was certain: when the dust settled, nothing would ever be the same. The lives of Maria, Javier, El Lobo, and everyone connected to them would be forever changed. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. The shocking twists and devastating consequences are just beginning to unfold. You won't want to miss what happens next. The air felt thick with anticipation as the days unfolded, and El Lobo's forces continued their aggressive advance across the border. Every moment counted. The authorities were moving in parallel, but every step they took seemed to be countered by El Lobo's intelligence network, which seemed to anticipate their every move. Back in the heart of Los Angeles, the task force was preparing for a final operation. They had gathered a small but incredibly skilled team, each agent carefully chosen for their expertise in handling high-stakes situations like this. They knew El Lobo's men were getting closer, and with every minute that passed, the chance to neutralize the threat was slipping away. There was no room for error. Maria, still in the secure holding facility, had become the focal point of the investigation. While many were focused on tracking El Lobo's movements, Maria's crucial intel, what she knew about the drug lord's operations, was now the most valuable asset they had. But it was also clear, as much as she could help, she was in grave danger. Her betrayal had made her a marked woman, not just in the eyes of her husband, but in the world she had once ruled over. With him underneath all the deception, Maria's heart was heavy. She had never anticipated that an affair would spiral into a full-scale war. The emotions that swirled inside her were overwhelming. Guilt. Fear. Regret. She had loved El Lobo once, but now, with every passing second, she felt herself slipping further away from that world. The power, the luxury, the control, it was all crashing down. The realization hit her hard. She couldn't just run from the monster El Lobo had become, and then, she made the call that in the dead of night, Maria reached out to the one person who could potentially save her. A former ally, now living a quiet life under a new identity, someone she trusted more than anyone else, her sister. Maria had always been the more calculating of the two, but in this moment, she was desperate. There was no one else she could turn to. She explained everything, how the affair had been uncovered, how her betrayal had led to the chaos, and how the authorities were now closing in. Her sister, who had spent years hiding from the cartel's clutches, listened quietly, then offered her only piece of advice: don't trust anyone, Maria. Not even yourself. The words weighed heavily on Maria as she put down the phone. Her sister's warning felt like a last breath of wisdom from a life she couldn't escape. But it was too late now. The storm was already here. On the other side of the world, El Lobo was losing control. The authorities were closing in on his empire, tightening their grip with every passing day. The sting operation that had exposed Maria's affair had been a well-timed strike, and now the noose was tightening. It was clear that El Lobo, once the mastermind of the Mexican drug trade, was becoming more erratic. His focus on Maria had taken over, overshadowing his once ironclad ability to keep his empire in check. The task force knew they were running out of time. Their plan was simple: use Maria's intel to lure El Lobo into a trap. But the complexity of the situation had grown exponentially. The cartel wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a well-oiled machine that didn't bend or break easily. To bring El Lobo down would require surgical precision. And even with Maria's cooperation, there was always the risk that someone close to them, someone within the ranks, could still be loyal to the drug lord. It all came to a head in the early hours of the next day. The task force had successfully managed to track El Lobo's movements to a small, discreet airstrip in northern Mexico, where he had been planning his escape. His men had been setting up a private flight to take him and his most trusted associates out of the country. The authorities were ready, surrounding the area with tactical teams, agents in place, and a backup plan should things go awry. At the same time, Maria was brought in for one last round of questioning. She was shown images of El Lobo's men, and though it was clear she was uncomfortable, she couldn't afford to hesitate. The task force had made it clear to her, her cooperation would ensure her survival. They offered her protection, but only if she could provide the intel that would bring her husband to justice. Maria closed her eyes, thinking back to the quiet moments she shared with El Lobo, the moments that felt like a lifetime ago. She remembered the first time they met, how his charisma had swept her off her feet. But now, it was all twisted, corrupted by violence and betrayal. The love she once felt for him was now nothing more than a distant echo. She nodded, ready to give up everything she knew. "I can tell you where he's going," she said. "I can tell you how to stop him." With that final piece of the puzzle, the authorities began to make their move. They had identified the airstrip where El Lobo's private plane was waiting for him. The flight path had been plotted, and the plan was set in motion. No one could afford to make a mistake. The sting operation escalated. As El Lobo's plane taxied down the runway, the first wave of agents moved in. The compound surrounding the airstrip was surrounded on all sides, the perimeter locked down. Within minutes, it was clear that El Lobo's escape route had been sealed. But El Lobo was no ordinary man, and his plan was no ordinary flight. He had anticipated a betrayal, and he was prepared to make his own move. The first shots rang out, the agents moved quickly, but El Lobo's men were well trained, relentless in their mission to protect their boss at all costs. Gunfire erupted from the hangars, and the air was filled with the sounds of chaos. It was a deadly game of cat and mouse, each side trying to outmaneuver the other. In the midst of the gunfight, El Lobo made a daring escape. He had abandoned his plane and was using the cover of his men to slip away into the dense jungle that surrounded the airstrip. The agents were in hot pursuit, but El Lobo knew this land better than anyone else. Every step he took brought him closer to the dark underground network he had spent years building. The chase was on. Maria's betrayal had set off a chain reaction, and now it was all coming to a head. With El Lobo on the run, and the task force in hot pursuit, the situation had become even more volatile. The drug lord was cornered, and there was no way out. But he was a survivor. He always had been. In the middle of this all, Maria was back in the holding room, watching through a monitor as agents poured over the chaos unfolding on the screen. The trap had been set. El Lobo had taken the bait, and now the net was closing in. But the real question was, would they catch him, or would he escape once again into the shadows? Hours passed. The chase intensified. The authorities knew El Lobo had nowhere left to go. As the night dragged on, word came in. El Lobo had been located, his men scattered in every direction. The authorities closed in on his position. It was just a matter of time before the most notorious drug lord in Mexico would finally meet his end, but even as El Lobo was captured, the impact of Maria's betrayal lingered. The storm that had begun with a single affair had spiraled into something much larger, something that would leave lasting scars on both sides of the Law. In the weeks following El Lobo's arrest, the full extent of his empire began to unravel. Maria was placed in witness protection, her fate now in the hands of the authorities. Javier, too, was being questioned, though his future remained uncertain, and as for El Lobo, his empire crumbled. His network, once untouchable, was now exposed to the world. But the story didn't end there. The cartel had left behind a network of loyalists, and a new war for control would soon begin. The authorities may have won this battle, but they knew they had only scratched the surface. The legacy of El Lobo and the chaos he had created would haunt them for years to come. The events that had begun with a single affair had destroyed an empire. And in this world of power and deception, no one, no matter how powerful, was safe. The question was, who would rise from the ashes of El Lobo's reign? As the dust settled, only one thing was certain: the game was far from over.